The cows were bawling, the ground was cracking, and my well, the one that had never gone dry in 40 years, was nothing but dust and echoes. I remember standing there under the blazing Texas sun, the heat shimmering off the soil, my throat tighter than a rusted faucet. My irrigation pipes hissed out air instead of water. And just across the fence, I could hear its sprinklers, ticking fountains, splashing, and the laughter of HOA families cooling off under water I no longer had. That's when I realized this wasn't a drought. This was theft. And the thief was Sarah Murphy, the so-called queen of the HOA, who once tried to fine me because my barn didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. That day I swore I wouldn't just take back my water, I'd make sure they'd never waste another drop again. And trust me, when I was done, Sarah Murphy would have to ask my permission just to flush her pool. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is, and don't forget to subscribe because you're about to hear how one old farmer bought the whole water company just to make the HOA pay. For most of my life, I thought peace was simple. You plant what you love, you water it, and you mind your own damn business. But peace doesn't last long when the HOA moves in next door. It started 5 years ago when the city decided to beautify the outskirts of our farming district. What that really meant was turning open land into high-priced cookie-cutter houses, the kind with plastic shutters, fake smiles, and real arrogance. They called it Crescent Meadows HOA, though there wasn't a single meadow left once they paved it all. At first I tried to be civil. I waved when I saw new neighbors, lent tools, even let kids come pet the calves. But soon after, the letters began showing up. The first one said my barn door color did not harmonize with community standards. The second one complained about my rooster creating a hostile sound environment. And the third one came with a $250 violation fine for having a tractor visible from the street. Guess who signed every one of those notices? Sarah Murphy. Sarah was the kind of woman who spoke like every word deserved applause. Platinum blonde hair that could blind you in sunlight, pearl necklaces for mowing the lawn, and an ego that could fill a water tower. She ran the HOA like it was a kingdom, and she was the crowned queen. I ignored most of her nonsense. My land wasn't part of the HOA, and she knew it, but that didn't stop her from trying to boss me around. She said my farm ruined the view for new buyers. I said her buyers ruined the soil. We didn't see eye to eye. Then last summer hit, and it hit hard. The hottest one on record. The county declared a stage 4 drought, no car washing, no lawn watering, no fountains, no exceptions. Every household got a strict water allotment. The local news showed lakes dropping to puddles. But somehow, Crescent Meadows looked greener than ever. Driving past the neighborhood felt like crossing into another planet. The air shimmered with sprinklers, kids ran through backyard misters, and Sarah's 3-tier fountain gushed like Niagara Falls. Meanwhile, my irrigation lines sputtered, my well pressure fell, and my crops, wheat, soy, and clover, were dying by the day. At first, I thought maybe my well pump was getting old. So I called up Earl Thompson, the only plumber in town, who still answered the phone after sundown. Earl was a grizzled old man who didn't sugarcoat anything. He stomped around the property, tapping pipes with a wrench, squinting at gauges, and muttering curses that could curdle milk. After an hour, he straightened up and said, "Jose, there ain't no leak here. You got yourself a thief." I laughed, half because it sounded ridiculous, half because I was scared it might be true. Who the hell steals water, Earl? He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. Somebody with a big yard and no conscience. The words stuck in my head like burrs. Over the next week, I kept watching my meter drop faster than it should. At night, I'd hear faint hissing water moving where it shouldn't. One evening, I walked down the fence line and noticed something odd. A patch of ground with freshly disturbed soil smooth as a scar. I knelt down, brushed it with my fingers, and felt it the cold touch of new PVC pipe just inches beneath the surface. I followed it with a flashlight, crawling through the tall grass, sweat rolling into my eyes. The pipe ran straight across my property line toward Crescent Meadows, and the closer it got to their side, the more careful the covering became. Fresh mulch, decorative rocks, even flower beds planted to hide the line. Someone had tapped my well. I wanted to rip it out right then, but a colder thought hit me. If I just cut it, they'd deny everything. They'd blame the drought, call me paranoid, maybe even file some bogus harassment claim. No, I needed proof. Ironclad proof. So the next morning, I started a quiet investigation. I called a friend at the county office, Linda Hayes, who owed me a favor for helping her husband repair their barn roof years ago. She dug into utility maps and told me something shocking. Crescent Meadows didn't have a secondary water line connection to the city. They were supposed to rely solely on the municipal pipeline, which had strict ration limits. Yet their consumption hadn't dropped at all. Jose, Linda said over the phone, her voice dropping low. Someone's feeding them water off the books. And if it's coming from your property, that's felony-level theft. That night, I set up 2 trail cameras near the fence. One aimed at my irrigation junction, the other facing the HOA's side. I waited. 2 nights later, the footage caught exactly what I needed. A hired contractor from the HOA maintenance crew, checking the underground pipe with a flashlight, twisting a valve that redirected water flow toward their sprinkler system. He even wore a safety vest with Crescent Meadows HOA printed across the back. I felt my pulse pound in my temples. My hands were shaking, not with fear, with fury. Sarah Murphy had taken things too far. It wasn't just stealing water, it was stealing the lifeblood of my farm. My family's legacy. My father dug that well himself before I was born. We'd survived storms, locusts, and fire. But I never thought I'd lose water to entitlement. Still, I didn't blow up. I didn't storm over the fence. That's what Sarah would expect, a hot-headed old farmer losing control. No, this time I'd fight smart. So I drove into town, parked across from the local cafe, and started asking quiet questions. I found out that Clearstream Utilities, the private water company that served our area, was in trouble. The owner, a man named Daniel Brooks, was behind on taxes and looking for buyers. The HOA was his biggest customer and his biggest headache, always late on payments and full of demands. An idea began to form. A crazy one, sure, but the kind of crazy that makes people remember your name. If Sarah thought she could steal my water, what would she do when I owned hers? That night, sitting on my porch with the stars above me and the dead earth beneath, I made a promise I wasn't going to yell, argue, or complain. I was going to end this with precision, legally, quietly, permanently, and the first step would be to let her drown herself in arrogance. So I waited. I watched as Sarah's fountain kept running, her grass stayed green, and her HOA bragged about being the most sustainable neighborhood in the county. They had no idea their time was running out, and the man they'd mocked for years was already learning how to turn their tap off. It was just past midnight when I decided to follow the pipe. The moon was high, painting silver over my dead fields, and the air felt heavy with dust and anger. I grabbed my old flashlight, my gloves, and the kind of patience only a lifetime of farming can teach you. The path along the fence line was quiet, too quiet. The cicadas had stopped singing, like even they didn't want to interrupt whatever justice was about to happen. My boots sank into soft soil, freshly disturbed. That was the first sign. Someone had been digging here recently. I got down on one knee, brushed aside a layer of mulch, and found it the thin white stripe of PVC pipe running right beneath my property. It looked new, too clean. I followed it, crawling between the fence posts, brushing dirt off every few feet. Each time my heart pounded a little faster, and then I saw where it led. Across the boundary line, just past a cluster of decorative shrubs, stood a small shed HOA property. It had a lock, a brand new water pressure gauge, and a silent hum coming from beneath. My beam of light caught a shiny metal valve inside through a vent hole. That's when I knew. My well was feeding their entire irrigation system. I felt that kind of cold fury that doesn't burn, it freezes. I sat there for a long time watching the shed, my jaw locked so tight it hurt. I could almost hear Sarah Murphy's smug laugh echoing from her porch across the way. The woman had literally tapped my lifeline, but storming over there and yelling wouldn't solve anything. Sarah was too slick. She'd twist it around, call the HOA lawyer, maybe even accuse me of tampering. No, I needed hard evidence, and I needed it legally. The next morning, I visited my friend Linda Hayes at the county resource office. She'd worked there for 20 years and trusted me enough to bend a few rules. When I told her what I'd found, her eyes widened. Jose, that's theft of utilities. If you can prove it, that HOA's in deep trouble. Can't just prove it, I said. Gotta make it stick. She nodded, pulling up property blueprints on her computer. Here. The official line from your well stops right here at the property border. Anything beyond this, she tapped the screen. Illegal. Then she leaned closer. Funny thing though, the HOA applied for a landscaping permit 6 months ago. Approved for non-water improvements only. No irrigation infrastructure. My lips curved into a slow grin. So they lied on the permit too. That night, I went full detective mode. I borrowed a small inspection camera from a buddy at the hardware store, ran it along my pipe junction, and recorded everything. The footage showed the split in my water line where their unauthorized pipe connected. Clean, new, and deliberate. To make sure it wasn't just a visual fluke, I turned off my main valve for a minute, and right on cue, their sprinkler system shut down. I turned it back on, and within seconds, the sound of water spraying returned from their side of the fence. Gotcha. But I still didn't move. Not yet. I wanted to see how deep this arrogance ran. So for 3 more days I watched, documented, and waited. And what I saw made my blood boil and my plan sharpen at the same time. Sarah had the nerve to host an HOA water efficiency event right there in her green backyard, while using my water to fill her koi pond for a photo op. There she was in her sun hat and floral dress, lecturing homeowners about conservation while fountains bubbled behind her. Every time she said, "We all have to do our part," I nearly broke my camera laughing. But anger without strategy is useless. So I decided to get professional help. I drove to see Mark Reynolds, an old friend and co-op manager who'd handled irrigation disputes for decades. Mark was the kind of man who'd seen every dirty trick in property management. After hearing me out, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You're sitting on a goldmine of proof, Jose. But before you go to the county, let's make sure they hang themselves with it." I frowned. Meaning, let them think they got away with it. Keep recording. When they realize the water's not infinite, they'll start getting desperate. That's when they'll make mistakes, big ones. I didn't like waiting, but Mark was right, so I kept quiet. Then the mistake came faster than either of us expected. 2 weeks later, I noticed a new trench dug near the shared access road. At first glance, it looked like a repair project. But when I checked the permit records online, there were none. Turns out the HOA had hired another contractor, this time to install a secondary feeder line toward their clubhouse. They were expanding the theft. That was the last straw. I went out early the next morning before sunrise. The mist clung low over the fields as I approached the junction. I shut off the valve connecting my main well to their illegal branch, then attached a high-pressure lock cap that couldn't be removed without tools. For good measure, I installed a tiny motion camera aimed right at the buried connection. By noon, chaos had erupted across Crescent Meadows. I sat on my porch sipping black coffee as sprinklers hissed to silence and fountains sputtered dry. A dozen homeowners ran around their yards like panicked pigeons. From my chair, I could see Sarah Murphy standing in the middle of her front lawn phone, in one hand garden hose in the other, looking like she'd just discovered fire wasn't hot anymore. She called someone, probably her maintenance guy, and within 20 minutes, a white truck pulled up. The worker crouched down near the fence, checking the connection. Then the best part, the camera caught him staring into the pipe with confusion before turning to Sarah and shaking his head. No water. Sarah stomped her heels into the dirt, shouting something I couldn't hear but could easily imagine. Something like, "Do you know who I am? Or fix it now." Oh, I knew exactly who she was. And she was about to find out exactly who I was too. That night, I reviewed the footage and sent copies to both the County Water Authority and the local sheriff's office, attaching a note. Unauthorized water diversion confirmed. Evidence attached. Source private, well registered under Jose Flores. It felt like dropping a match on a puddle of gasoline. Within 48 hours, county inspectors arrived at Crescent Meadows. I wasn't there, but I didn't have to be. The HOA's private Facebook page, which I'd been accidentally invited to through a neighbor, exploded with posts. Anyone else's lawn not getting water. Does anyone know why there are government trucks outside Sarah's house? Did we lose access to the well? The best comment came from one homeowner, wait, whose well? The next day, the county officially fined the HOA for illegal water diversion, pending investigation. Sarah tried to spin it, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that they didn't know the source was private. But the video didn't lie. Neither did the permits. Her first move after the fine was the most predictable one. She came to me. I was fixing a fence post when I heard her voice behind me. "Jose, we need to talk." I turned slowly, wiped sweat off my forehead, and gave her the kind of polite nod that makes people nervous. She was standing there in designer sunglasses and sandals that looked allergic to dirt. "There's been a mix-up with the irrigation system," she said, smiling too wide. "Maybe your plumbing connected wrong. I'm sure it was just a mistake." "A mistake," I said, leaning on the shovel that pumps water uphill, across property lines, under 2 fences, and into your fountain. Her smile faltered. "Let's not make this ugly." "Oh, it's already ugly," I said. "You just didn't notice when it was working in your favor." She swallowed hard, then muttered, "I'll talk to the board. We'll make it right." But I wasn't interested in her promises. I already had something bigger in motion, a way to make sure this woman, her HOA, and every self-entitled neighbor who'd ever sneered at me would have to ask for permission every time they wanted a single drop. Because if she thought I'd stop at locking a pipe, she hadn't seen what happens when a farmer starts buying stock in a water company. 3 days after the inspectors left, the entire neighborhood buzzed with rumors. Crescent Meadows, once the pride of the county, now looked like a wilted salad. Sprinklers sat dead, fountains turned into bird baths, and homeowners started realizing that their monthly HOA fees had been funding Sarah Murphy's private oasis. I figured she'd try to keep things quiet, but that wasn't Sarah's way. No, Sarah handled embarrassment the way a cat handles water, by pretending it didn't exist and clawing anyone who mentioned it. So when she invited me to the HOA's annual barbecue to clear the air, I knew it wasn't an apology. It was a trap dressed in potato salad. I showed up anyway. The park was immaculate, at least what was left of it. They'd rented a massive water tank and disguised the hose under fake rocks so Sarah's personal lawn would still glisten. Half the guests knew the truth, but everyone kept smiling. That's the HOA way: gossip behind your neighbor's hydrangeas, then pretend you're best friends at the next cookout. Sarah stood near the grill wearing a pink floral blouse and a smile that could cut glass. Jose Flores, she sang out her tone, sweet enough to rot your teeth. I was hoping you'd stop by. Wouldn't miss it, I said. Heard there'd be free water. Her smile twitched. She gestured toward the food table. Please grab a plate. We're just trying to move past all this confusion. That was her word for felony water theft. As I filled a paper plate with baked beans, she kept talking loud enough for everyone to hear. You know, Jose, it's such a shame when small misunderstandings turn into big problems. We're all neighbors here. Surely we can settle this without drama. I leaned on the table, met her eyes, and said, Drama's your department, Sarah. I'm just the guy who pays for his own water. A few homeowners nearby tried not to choke on their ribs. Sarah laughed, high-pitched and brittle. Well, I suppose we'll let the county handle it then. After all, no one wants to make this uglier than it already is. That's when her husband, Greg Murphy, the HOA's vice president of aesthetics, joined in. Big guy, golf tan, permanent sunglasses. Jose, he said, lowering his voice, Sarah's been under a lot of stress. Maybe you could ease up a bit. She didn't mean any harm. I looked at him, then at her. Funny. My cows didn't mean any harm either when they went thirsty. He stiffened. You don't want this to get legal, do you? I grinned. Greg, it's already legal. You just don't like who's winning. Sarah's face turned redder than her wine. Well, she said sharply, I hope you're satisfied. You've ruined our irrigation system, and now everyone's lawns are suffering. Correction, I said. Your system was built on my water. You ruined it the moment you tapped that line. The whole park went quiet. You could have heard a mosquito land on a corn leaf. Sarah recovered quickly, plastering on another fake smile. Let's not be dramatic, she said. We can fix this like adults. Perhaps some compensation, I tilted my head. Compensation? You mean the thousands in fines you owe the county, or the part where your HOA tried to bury evidence her mask cracked? You don't have proof of that. Oh, don't worry, I said. I'm not the one you'll need to convince. Then I tipped my hat and left. As I walked away, I could feel her glare burning through my back like sunlight through glass. That was fine. She could glare all she wanted. I was already planning the next step. That night I sat on my porch with my laptop, the screen glowing against the dark. Mark Reynolds called right on cue. You poked the hornet's nest, he said with a chuckle. Good, I replied. Now they'll show where the honey's hidden. Mark laughed. You're enjoying this too much. After what they did, not enough. He told me the county's fines had hit the HOA hard, nearly $10,000 in penalties, not counting legal fees. And because Sarah had authorized the landscaping improvements, she was personally liable. But knowing Sarah, she'd try to twist her way out of it. And that's exactly what she did. 2 days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox with the HOA seal printed on it. It read, Dear Mr. Flores, after careful consideration, Crescent Meadows HOA has decided to pursue civil mediation to address the alleged water diversion issue. We believe cooperation will serve both parties. Sincerely, Sarah Murphy, HOA President. I read it twice and laughed out loud. Cooperation. That word coming from Sarah was like hearing a cat promise to share its dinner. I wasn't interested in mediation. I wanted exposure, the kind you can't PR spin away. So I started talking to Daniel Brooks, the struggling owner of Clearstream Utilities. We'd met before years back when he came to inspect my meter. He remembered me and remembered how much trouble the HOA gave his company over special requests and unpaid invoices. When I mentioned that, I was interested in investing. His eyes lit up. Jose, you serious? We've been looking for partners to keep this place afloat. I'm not just serious, I said. I want control. He hesitated. Control, you mean... if I buy in, I want the authority to enforce water distribution policies fairly. And I don't want that HOA getting a drop more than they pay for. Daniel nodded slowly. Well, the board's meeting next week. You might just get your wish. Meanwhile, back at Crescent Meadows, Sarah was losing her kingdom. The grass in front of her house had faded to a dull yellow, her koi pond was a cracked basin, and the grand three-tier fountain now stood dry, collecting dust and dead leaves. I passed by one afternoon and caught her standing there, hands on hips, glaring at the fountain like it had betrayed her personally. "Problems with the plumbing?" I asked from the truck window. She jumped, clearly startled. "Mind your own business, Jose." "Oh, I am," I said, nodding toward her dead lawn. "This is my business." She turned away, muttering something about lawsuits. But what really broke her wasn't the lawn, it was the neighbors. Once the fines rolled in, HOA members started asking questions. Why were their fees so high? Why had Sarah insisted on managing the water system herself? Why was there no record of a city permit for the irrigation expansion? At the next HOA meeting, half the board resigned. The rest demanded transparency. Sarah tried to regain control by calling for a re-election, but the residents voted no confidence unanimously. The Queen had lost her crown. And she didn't even know the worst part yet, that I was about to become her water supplier. When Daniel called the following week, his tone was pure relief. "Jose, the board approved the sale. You're now majority shareholder of Clearstream Utilities." I nearly dropped my coffee. "You're serious?" "Signed and sealed this morning." "Congrats, partner." I leaned back in my chair, staring out across the parched fields that had caused me so much grief. The irony was delicious. The next morning, I drafted an official company memo titled Revised Water Distribution Policy for Drought Conditions. It read simply, "Effective immediately, all non-agricultural entities under Clearstream Utilities will be subject to strict drought restrictions. Excessive lawn irrigation and ornamental water features are prohibited until further notice. Violations will result in suspension of service." Guess which HOA fell squarely under non-agricultural Crescent Meadows? I signed it, hit send, and sat back, feeling a satisfaction no amount of revenge could top. The next phase had begun, the one where Sarah Murphy finally learned that you don't mess with a man who owns the faucet. And for the first time in weeks, I slept like a man who knew the water would be waiting for him come morning. The sun rose over my fields like molten copper that morning. For the first time in months, I felt a strange peace, the kind that comes when you finally hold the steering wheel of your own destiny. The air was still dry, but inside my chest, it felt like a storm about to break. I owned the water company now. Let that sink in. The same old man Sarah Murphy, once called a stubborn dirt farmer, was now the one signing her water bills, and she didn't know it. Not yet, but she was about to find out in the most poetic way possible. The moment my new drought policy went public, the HOA email chains lit up like a Christmas tree on fire. I'd set it up so that every Clearstream customer got a notice at the same time. The subject line was simple: water restriction alert, effective immediately. Underneath the message explained how excessive outdoor water use, especially for aesthetic landscaping and fountains, was prohibited until further notice. Violators would face disconnection or fines. Within hours, the Crescent Meadows group chat was chaos. I didn't have to imagine the messages. My buddy Linda at the county office was still in their chat for monitoring purposes. She sent me screenshots. "Is this real? No fountains. How are we supposed to maintain property value? We pay for water. We deserve access. Call Sarah. She'll fix it. Oh, Sarah." She didn't take long to react. The very next day, I received a formal complaint email from Crescent Meadows HOA addressed to Clearstream Utilities Corporate Division, which in reality was just me and one tired secretary named Jolene, who worked part-time out of the office downtown. The email read, "Dear Clearstream, the new water restrictions are unacceptable. Our community maintains high standards that depend on proper irrigation and landscape upkeep. We demand exemption from these limitations. Failure to comply will result in legal action. Sincerely, Sarah Murphy, HOA President." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Jolene, bless her heart, printed the email out and brought it to my desk, shaking her head. "Boss, you want me to handle this one?" I nodded. "Yep, send her our standard response." That response was simple. Per county drought regulation, no exemptions will be granted. Continued violation will lead to suspension of service. We sent it off, and I sat back imagining her expression when she read it. By Friday, reports started coming in. The Crescent Meadows sprinklers had gone dry again. This time, there was no secret well to save them. I made sure the Clearstream technicians installed metering valves across the HOA's entire zone. If anyone tried to override the flow rate, the system would automatically cut pressure to zero. That night, I poured myself a whiskey and walked out to the fence. From my property, I could see Sarah's grand fountain in the moonlight, silent, cracked, and gray. The Queen's crown was gathering dust. Then I heard voices muffled and angry coming from her yard. "Sarah, the grass is dying. This is out of control. You said we'd have water back by the weekend." I smiled. The rebellion had begun. By Monday, it wasn't just whispers anymore, it was open war inside the HOA. I got the full picture from Linda, who loved every second of it. Sarah called an emergency meeting in the community hall. Homeowners packed the room sweaty and furious. The AC couldn't keep up with the crowd, and without water, even the decorative plants around the hall had wilted. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah began trying to project calm. This is only temporary. I've spoken with the water company. Then why do we still have no water? Someone shouted. Because they're corrupt, Sarah snapped, slamming her palm on the table. This is retaliation by that farmer next door. He's behind all of this. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. You mean Jose Flores? A neighbor asked. The guy you said was paranoid, her voice wavered. He's manipulating the county, I'm sure of it. Another voice from the back, Sarah. They said the new policy came from Clearstream Utilities. That's not county. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Then fix it, someone else yelled. We pay dues. You said you had influence. Linda told me later that the meeting ended with Sarah storming out red-faced and humiliated while residents shouted after her. One even demanded she refund their HOA fees. By the next morning, half the neighborhood lawns had turned yellow, and local news trucks started circling like vultures. Around noon, my office phone rang. Jolene answered, then held the receiver toward me. It's her, she mouthed. I took the call. Mr. Flores. Her voice was tight, polite, and trembling. I assume you're aware of the chaos your company's policies have caused. I'm aware of the drought, I said, and the fact that some people still think fountains are more important than food crops. Her breath caught. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I'm enjoying fairness, I replied. Something the HOA could learn a thing or two about. Jose, please. Her tone softened, suddenly almost human. Our community can't survive like this. Property values are plummeting. The board is threatening to replace me. There has to be a compromise. I leaned back in my chair. You want compromise. Pay your outstanding fines. Apologize publicly. Then maybe I'll consider revising your water quota. You're blackmailing me. No, Sarah, I'm educating you. She was silent for a long time. Then, cold as ice, she said, You think you've won, but people like me don't stay down for long. Oh, I know, I said. That's why I'm making sure you don't get up. She hung up. For the next week, Sarah tried every trick in the HOA handbook. She called the county commissioner, the mayor's office, even threatened to contact a federal investigator. But every time she ran into the same wall, Clearstream Utilities now operated completely within the law. Every restriction had been approved and logged by the Drought Authority, the same one that had fined her earlier. Her final move was to attempt sabotage. One night, 2 HOA contractors were caught tampering with one of the meter boxes along the main line. Unfortunately for them, the area was under 24-hour surveillance, my cameras. The footage showed both men cutting the seal trying to adjust pressure. The second the wrench turned, the entire unit locked itself down and sent an alert directly to our office. Within 20 minutes, the sheriff's deputies were on site. The next morning, Sarah's phone number appeared on the sheriff's incident report. She had authorized the maintenance. When I read that, I couldn't help but laugh. The woman just couldn't stop digging. The fallout was spectacular. The local paper ran the headline, HOA president under investigation for water violation. Again, every store in town had copies of that article. Even the diner waitress who brought me breakfast slid the paper across the counter and winked. You see this? Jose, sounds like karma finally turned off her tap. By the end of that week, the HOA board voted unanimously to suspend Sarah as president pending investigation. Greg resigned before they could push him out. And for me, business was booming. Farmers who'd once struggled with limited irrigation now had priority access through Clearstream's new fair use policy. My fields were finally green again. Sometimes justice doesn't need a courtroom. It just needs a pipe wrench, a signature, and patience. A few days later, I got one last visit from Sarah. She showed up at my gate in the middle of the afternoon wearing a sun hat and sunglasses big enough to hide her shame. The heat shimmered around her like a mirage. I walked out slowly, wiping grease off my hands. Something I can do for you. Her voice was barely steady. You've made your point, Jose. You won. Happy now? Not yet, I said. Still waiting for that apology. She laughed bitterly. Don't hold your breath. Don't worry, I said, stepping closer. I don't need to. I've got plenty of water. She froze, face twitching, then turned on her heel and stormed back to her car. The tires spun dust all over my driveway. I watched her go until she disappeared down the road, a trail of dust, following her like the last gasp of her empire. And as I looked out over my land, the irrigation system humming smoothly again, I couldn't help but smile. The water was flowing where it belonged, and the people who stole it were finally learning what true drought feels like. It's funny how power changes the air around you. A month ago, I was the dusty old farmer they laughed at, the weird guy with the roosters. Now every major homeowner in the county had my company's number saved in their phones. Same Jose Flores, same boots, same truck. But suddenly, when you own the water, people remember to say, "Sir." Clearstream Utilities was a modest business, 2 technicians, 1 front desk clerk, and a system of pipes older than most marriages. But it had potential, and I intended to make it shine. The first week I took over, I walked through the control room like a general inspecting his troops. Every valve, every meter, every pressure gauge, I studied them all. My partner Mark Reynolds joined me that morning, sipping black coffee as we checked the dashboards. "You sure about all this, Jose?" he asked. "Running a water company isn't like running a farm." I grinned. "It's all the same, Mark. Keep things flowing, fix leaks fast, and don't let parasites feed off your roots." He chuckled. "You mean Sarah Murphy?" "Exactly." By now, Crescent Meadows was in chaos. Sarah's suspension had turned the HOA board into a battlefield. Some residents wanted her gone permanently, others blamed me for ruining the neighborhood's image. But the truth was simple. They'd built their paradise on stolen ground, and now the bill had come due. The irony, I was about to make them pay legally for what they'd once stolen. As the new owner, I met with county officials to revise the regional water distribution plan. We reclassified zones based on priority agricultural and emergency services, top priority. Residential, essential use, moderate priority. Aesthetic or non-essential, like fountains, lawns, and HOA vanity projects, restricted until the drought ended. Every word was backed by regulation, sealed and signed by the county's Drought Management Committee. The next day, my company issued new contracts. For most people, it didn't change much, but for Crescent Meadows, the fine print hit like a hammer. Their water rate doubled, their flow quota was cut in half, and their request for beautification exemptions was denied. I knew Sarah would read that clause and choke on her lemon water. Sure enough, the following week, I received a letter written in her signature passive-aggressive tone. "To whom it may concern, it has come to our attention that Crescent Meadows HOA has been unfairly targeted under new water regulations. Our community is a model of excellence, and we refuse to be punished for our success. Please reconsider this discriminatory policy immediately. Respectfully, Sarah Murphy, HOA President, suspended." I forwarded the email to Mark and typed a short reply. "Dear Mrs. Murphy, your community is indeed a model of what happens when arrogance meets reality. Enjoy your restricted flow. Sincerely, the guy who owns the faucet." Of course, I never sent that version. Jolene wrote a proper one with legal jargon instead. But oh, I wanted to. While the HOA fumed, Clearstream started thriving. Farmers from neighboring towns came to thank me for prioritizing their irrigation systems. I drove through miles of green pastures that had been brown just weeks earlier. It felt good, not because I'd won, but because the balance was finally restored. Still, I couldn't resist checking on Crescent Meadows from time to time. Old habits die hard. Driving by one afternoon, I saw a sight that nearly made me spit out my coffee. Sarah kneeling on her lawn with a bucket trying to hand water patches of dead grass. Her once perfect emerald paradise now looked like patchwork straw. Even the HOA's prized sign, the one that read Crescent Meadows, luxury living, was starting to fade and peel. Across the street, another homeowner had replaced his grass with gravel to save on water bills. A hand-painted sign in his yard read, "Welcome to Crescent Dust Fields." Poetic justice had a sense of humor. A week later, Mark and I attended a county business luncheon, mostly bureaucrats, landowners, and a few old money types pretending to care about conservation. I wasn't one for fancy events, but Mark insisted. Halfway through the meeting, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned, and there she was. Sarah Murphy in a beige suit and a smile sharper than broken glass. "Jose Flores," she said, voice dripping honey and venom. "I hear congratulations are in order. The town's newest tycoon." "Never thought I'd see you outside a fountain," I said. Her smile flickered. "You've made your point. But if you think this power trip will last, you're mistaken. People are already complaining. My HOA isn't the only one suffering." I took a sip of my coffee. Difference is, they didn't steal their supply first. She leaned closer, whispering, "You can't keep me down forever, old man. You own the water company now, sure, but I know people. Investors. And when they buy it out, you'll be the one left thirsty." I leaned back calm as the ocean before a storm. "Then you better hope those investors like dealing with drought penalties, because Clearstream's not for sale. Ever." Her expression froze. "Oh, and Sarah," I added, If you really want your grass green again, try painting it. She left without another word. 2 weeks later, the county news ran a feature titled From Farmer to Flowmaster, How Jose Flores Changed Drought Management Forever. They called me a local hero. I didn't feel like one, I just did what needed doing. But I'll admit, seeing Sarah's HOA mentioned as an example of wasteful mismanagement was the cherry on top. Meanwhile, Crescent Meadows continued its slow public collapse. Without water for aesthetics, their property values tanked. Realtors pulled out. New buyers vanished. Residents started quitting the HOA entirely. The bylaws allowed dissolution if 60% of members voted for it. And after one particularly brutal summer week, that's exactly what happened. They called a meeting, and when the vote was counted, the Crescent Meadows HOA was officially dissolved. The association bank account was empty, the fines unpaid, and Sarah's signature was still on every invoice. She wasn't just broke, she was liable. I didn't hear from Sarah for a while after that. Then one night, Mark forwarded me a link from an online auction site. There it was, estate sale, Crescent Meadows Lot 47, former HOA president's residence. The pictures showed her once beautiful house, now stripped bare. The koi pond was gone, the fountain dismantled, the grass completely dead. The starting bid, half its original market price. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. A month later, during a Clearstream shareholders meeting, one of my technicians brought me an envelope. Came for you personally, sir. No return address. I opened it. Inside was a single piece of stationery embossed with faint floral patterns. Sarah's handwriting neat but trembling. Jose, you've taken everything I had. I hope you're proud of yourself. Crescent Meadows is gone. My home is gone. But if it makes you feel better, you were right. We stole from you. I just never thought it would cost me this much. Sarah Murphy. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in my desk drawer, and said nothing. Revenge always sounds sweet until you taste the afterburn. But even then, I didn't regret it. Because this was never about vengeance. It was about justice, and about proving that even one old farmer can outsmart an empire built on arrogance. Still, as I looked out the window that evening and saw the lights of the town flicker against the dark horizon, I realized something strange. I didn't feel victorious anymore. Just done. The war was over. The wells were full again. And sometimes peace feels heavier than anger ever did. By late August, the heat had grown vicious again, the kind that made the sky shimmer like a mirage and turned every breath into dust. But this time I didn't worry. My wells were strong, my crops steady, and my irrigation lines hummed with steady pressure. For the first time in years, everything worked exactly as it should. Everything except Crescent Meadows. Their lawns were long gone. Their once green paradise now looked like a graveyard of dead turf and cracked pavement. The HOA sign that once boasted Crescent Meadows a premier community now hung crooked, half-buried in dust. I'd drive by, sometimes mostly out of habit, but also because I couldn't resist watching karma do her work. Sarah Murphy, however, was nowhere to be seen. After losing her house, she'd vanished from town. Word was she'd moved to a condo 2 counties away, where the rent included water and humiliation came free. The HOA was officially dead, dissolved by majority vote. The members who remained were too broke, too tired, or too embarrassed to fight anymore. Some houses were sold to new buyers, others stood empty. Without regular maintenance, the community's drainage system began failing. When the first big rainstorm hit in September, the streets flooded ankle-deep within minutes. I didn't take joy in seeing homes damaged, but I did see irony. They'd stolen water to make their lawns perfect, and now they had more of it than they could handle, the wrong kind in the wrong place. That's the way karma works. It doesn't take sides, just balance. Clearstream, meanwhile, was thriving. My fair use policies had become a county-wide model. Other towns adopted similar frameworks, prioritizing agriculture, emergency services, and responsible households. The local paper even called it the Flores Standard. Mark joked that I'd end up running for county commissioner someday. I told him I'd rather wrestle a bull than sit in another meeting with politicians. Still, I'll admit, it felt good seeing common sense win for once. But just when I thought the story had ended, karma handed me one last surprise. One morning, Jolene buzzed me from the front office. "Jose," she said, "we've got a visitor. Says it's urgent." I sighed. "Another HOA." "Not quite. She says her name's Emily Watson. Claims she used to live in Crescent Meadows." I told her to send the woman in. Emily looked to be in her early 30s, polite but exhausted. She clutched a small notebook in her hands like it was her last line of defense. "Mr. Flores," she said softly, I don't mean to intrude, but I used to be Sarah Murphy's secretary for the HOA. That got my attention. Oh, she nodded quickly. I'm not here to defend her. Quite the opposite. I quit after the investigation started. But there's something you should know. She opened her notebook and slid a few papers across my desk, old HOA meeting minutes, signed invoices, and receipts for maintenance work. Every one of them was connected to the illegal water connection Sarah had authorized months before the theft was discovered. She tried to pin the whole thing on the contractors, Emily said, but I found these in the archives. She signed every approval herself. She even wrote a memo saying the water diversion plan will be reimbursed quietly once drought ends. I flipped through the pages. The handwriting matched the letter she'd sent me weeks ago. Same neat, cursive, same arrogance hidden behind tidy pen strokes. I looked up. Why bring this to me now? Emily hesitated. Because I heard she's suing the county. My eyebrows shot up. You're joking. She's claiming her reputation was destroyed unfairly, that the water theft investigation was mishandled. She's blaming you, the county, and even Clearstream. I sat back in my chair, letting out a long, tired laugh. That woman's got more nerve than a copperhead. Emily shrugged. I thought you'd want to know before it hits the news. And she was right. By the following week, Sarah Murphy was back in the headlines, not as the villain, but as the self-proclaimed victim of corruption and conspiracy. Her new lawyer was some city hotshot named Blake Carson, famous for representing developers in environmental cases. He went on local TV and called me a vindictive farmer abusing his corporate position. I nearly spit out my coffee when I heard that. But instead of getting angry, I smiled. Let them come. I had the receipts literally. The hearing took place in the county courthouse, a small red brick building that smelled like old paper and stale coffee. Reporters gathered outside, microphones pointed like bayonets. Sarah walked in wearing a gray suit flanked by her lawyer, chin high as ever. She gave me a passing glance that said, "You can't touch me anymore." I sat quietly in the back row, wearing my cleanest shirt and oldest hat, a reminder of who I was before all this nonsense started. When her lawyer began his speech, he painted a picture of tragedy. My client, Mrs. Sarah Murphy, is a respected community leader whose life was ruined by a smear campaign led by a powerful local businessman. Powerful businessman. That one made me snort. I was a farmer with a company the size of a gas station. Then came the evidence stage, and that's when Emily Watson took the stand. She looked nervous but determined. When asked if she had proof that Sarah authorized the theft, she opened her notebook. The courtroom went dead silent as she read the memos one after another. Sarah Murphy directive to extend water line under community fence. Sarah Murphy approval to use unregistered contractor. Sarah Murphy note, do not discuss with county until after dry season. Each document had her signature dated and clear. Sarah's lawyer tried to object, claiming the documents were unauthorized, but the judge wasn't buying it. By the end of the day, Sarah's face had turned the color of clay. She didn't look at me once. When the verdict came, the judge dismissed her lawsuit entirely and added a recommendation for the district attorney to review the case for possible fraudulent filings. The reporters rushed out to file their stories before sunset. I walked out quietly, but one of them caught me at the door. "Mr. Flores," a young woman called out. "Any comment on today's outcome?" I smiled and tipped my hat. "Water always finds its level, ma'am. Guess justice does too." The next day's headline read, "Former HOA president loses lawsuit, evidence shows she orchestrated theft." And just like that, Sarah Murphy was finished for good. Over the next few months, the remnants of Crescent Meadows slowly disappeared. Developers bought the land cheap, bulldozed the dead yards, and started building smaller, more sustainable homes. This time, the community would run on a water-sharing model under Clearstream supervision, of course. One of the new buyers, a young couple named Daniel and Elise Ford, stopped by my farm to thank me. "We heard about what happened," Daniel said. "You basically saved this whole region from running dry." I shook his hand. "Just doing what's right. Learn from their mistakes, don't build on vanity." He laughed. "Don't worry, we're putting in cactus and gravel. Smart kid." Late one evening, I drove past the construction site that used to be Crescent Meadows. The old fountain was gone, replaced by a dry rock garden. The streets were empty, except for a few deer wandering near the lots. For the first time, the land looked peaceful, like it could finally breathe again. I parked for a while, watching the twilight settle. A gentle wind rolled through, carrying the faint scent of wet soil from my fields. The cycle had come full circle, the thief was gone, the balance restored, and the water back where it belonged. Still, I couldn't help but whisper to the night, "Rest easy, Sarah. You finally learned you can't steal from the land and expect it not to take something back." And with that, I started the truck, and headed home, headlights cutting through the quiet dark, the sound of running water from my irrigation lines humming like a lullaby. A year later, if you drove down County Road 46, you wouldn't recognize Crescent Meadows. The grand iron gate with gold lettering was gone. The streets had been renamed, the fountains torn down, and the entrance now had a simple wooden sign, Willow Bend Community Sustainable Living. Where Sarah Murphy's manicured lawns once gleamed, there were now raised garden beds and rainwater barrels. The HOA had been replaced by a co-op committee, and Clearstream Utilities managed the new irrigation schedule. Every house used just what it needed, nothing more. Sometimes I'd stop there in my truck just to watch. Kids chased each other around gravel paths, the air smelled faintly of basil and soil, and for the first time in years that place felt real. Funny thing, the land always remembers who treats it right. Clearstream kept growing. With Mark's help, we expanded the pipeline infrastructure, added solar-powered pumps, and cut costs for rural farmers. What once was a struggling water company now had a waiting list of clients. My name apparently had become synonymous with accountability. I wasn't a businessman by nature. I was a farmer who believed in cause and effect. Plant right, harvest right, water, justice, life, it's all the same cycle. But still, I'd get those letters. People writing from out of town asking, "Are you really the man who bought the water company to get back at the HOA?" I'd laugh and write back, yes, but revenge wasn't the point. It was education with a flow meter. One morning that spring, I got a visit from an unfamiliar car, a dark blue sedan, pulling up my gravel driveway. The driver stepped out, a middle-aged woman with short hair, neat posture, and a hesitant smile. "Mr. Flores," she asked. "That's me," I said, lowering my shovel. "You selling something?" She shook her head. "No, sir. I'm actually here on behalf of someone else. Sarah Murphy." I froze, staring for a moment before I spoke. Didn't expect to hear that name again. She asked me to deliver this. The woman handed me a thick envelope, then nodded politely and left without another word. I turned it over in my hands for a long while before opening it. Inside was a short letter and a cashier's check, $5,000. "Jose, I sold what little I had left. Consider this, what I owed you from the beginning, for the fines, the trouble, and maybe a fraction of the peace I cost you. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just closure. I live quietly now. No lawns, no fountains. I started volunteering at a community garden. We teach kids how to grow with less water. It feels strange, but it feels right. Maybe this is what it was always meant to be. Sarah Murphy." I set the letter down slowly, the edges trembling slightly in my hands. For the first time, I didn't feel anger when I thought of her. Just a strange kind of calm. Like maybe after all that noise, something finally found balance. I deposited the check the next day, not into my account, but into the community co-op's fund. It went toward building another shared irrigation system. Sarah's debt, in a way, watered new life. By midsummer, the county held a water stewardship celebration. Local families, farmers, and city officials gathered to mark the first full year without a single drought violation. Mark insisted I come. "You're the reason this all started, Jose," he said. "You can't hide behind the farm forever." So I went. The event was held on the very edge of what used to be Crescent Meadows, now a lush community garden filled with vegetables, herbs, and wildflowers. There was no stage, no champagne, just picnic tables and honest smiles. When it came time for speeches, the mayor introduced me with a grin. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the man who reminded us that water is life and not a luxury." I cleared my throat, stepped up, and looked at the crowd. The sun was setting, throwing golden light across the field, glinting off the water barrels that shimmered quietly along the edges. "I'm not a speaker," I began. "I'm just a man who got tired of watching good things go to waste. When this all started, I thought I was fighting for my land. But really, I was fighting for respect, for the water, for the work, for what feeds us all." I paused, letting the words settle. "See, water doesn't care who you are. It doesn't bow to money or rules or pride. It just moves steady, quiet, relentless. You can steal it, you can hoard it, but sooner or later it'll find its way home. It always does." The crowd was silent for a moment, then broke into applause. As I stepped down, a little boy tugged my sleeve. "Mister, is it true you bought a whole company just to stop the bad guys?" I chuckled. Sort of kid. But I didn't stop them. The truth did. I just gave it a push. He grinned, holding a small plant pot. "We're growing peppers today. You want one?" I took it, feeling the damp soil in my hand, and smiled. "Sure thing. Every bit counts." That night, after everyone went home, I stayed behind for a while, sitting on the tailgate of my truck. The stars stretched out endless above the dark fields, and the air smelled faintly of rain. Mark walked up beside me with 2 cold sodas. You did good, old man. I smiled. We did good. He looked out at the horizon. Think Sarah ever drives by here, I shrugged. Maybe. But I think she's where she needs to be. Sometimes you gotta lose everything before you start learning. He nodded slowly. Funny how life works. Funny, I said. But fair. We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the hum of crickets and the slow, steady trickle of water in the nearby canal. The sound of something constant, eternal, forgiving. If you've stuck with me till now, here's what I want you to take away. Life has a rhythm like the flow of a stream. You can try to dam it up, redirect it, or steal from it, but sooner or later it'll carve its own way back. Sarah Murphy tried to control everything, nature, neighbors, even the truth. And in the end, she lost it all. But she also learned. And maybe that's what justice really is, not revenge but realization. So wherever you're watching from tonight, take a second to think about what's worth protecting: your home, your land, your peace, and remember that fairness doesn't shout, it flows. If you enjoyed this story, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. And don't forget to subscribe, because in this world of crazy HOAs, there's always another story waiting just down the fence line.